Thank you for joining us for this special event in honor of Asian Pacific Heritage Month. As we wait for people to join in, I'd like to introduce our community to any new viewers. I'm Michelle Zhang, the founder of the Society of Heart's Delights, or Yuan She in Chinese. We established our community platform right before the pandemic hit and have been hosting online events. We are a bilingual community of Chinese immigrants who moved to America as adults and work in diverse fields. We create opportunities for our members to engage meaningfully with local life and culture, contribute to the public good, and cultivate a sense of belonging while having fun. Our overarching mission is to bridge our Chinese immigrant community with other communities and a variety of cultural groups. For example, Mexican, Vietnamese, LGBTQ, and the local arts, nonprofits, and civics communities, etc. We believe it's important to cultivate greater understanding, connection, and cooperation within broader society. If you want to know more about us, check out our website, thesocietyofheartsdelights.com or yuanshe.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn under the name of the Society of Heart's Delights, and on WeChat for Mandarin speakers as Yuan She. Okay, here we are, Asian American Heritage Month. Last year, we held an online event to celebrate our heritage, and we discussed a PBS documentary series, Asian Americans. I believe learning about Asian American history can really help immigrants like myself who have chosen America as our home to feel a stronger sense of belonging. But this year feels a little different. As anti-Asian discrimination persists and attacks escalate, we should dig deeper to understand the root causes in American society going back generations, and also the impact of the recent political climate against the backdrop of this global pandemic. I can't think of better guest to talk about this topic with us. It's my hope that grounding ourselves in our shared history and empowering ourselves with knowledge can have a positive impact and bring us all together, not only within our many Asian American communities, but with our diverse allies who share our vision for a better America. Now is the time for action and engagement. I hope you will help me to give a warm welcome to our very special guest today and join the conversation in the chat. Without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to our today's moderator, my friend, Dr. Zhang. Dr. Zhang is one of the most passionate and knowledgeable math educators I know. She's quite well known in both the US and China, and is a founder and a lead teacher of Inspire School. She's also a strong advocate for mental health and whole person education. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Dr. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in Yuan She's event. I have been a fan and a member of your WeChat group for a while, and I really appreciate this opportunity to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month with you guys and with our esteemed guests. Our guests came from diverse background and a variety of academic interests. You'll see that they are literally a united nation, as well as part of an intellectual powerhouse. They have in their academic pursuits all converged at one of the flag universities of this country, University of Illinois. And they worked on a very interesting project called Yellow Peril Redux, of which Dr. Shao and the rest of her team will give the introduction, and we will discuss in detail very soon. Let me first introduce the team members, and you guys can wave when I call your name. Let me introduce Dr. Dan Shao, who is the leader of this project. She is an associate professor of East Asian language and cultures, as well as gender and women study at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has a wonderful associate website, which you can check out later. We can send it onto our information panel. Dr. Matthew Brown is here. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Accounting, Economics, and Finance at the University of Illinois, Springfield. Is that where Lincoln was from, Matthew? Springfield?
He spent a lot of time there, yes.
Yeah. He has a BS, MS, and PhD from Florida State University, and MA in Economics from American University, and an MS in Accountancy from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. His long-term interest in study of American reactions to Japanese and later Chinese economic imports and growth began after reading former Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca's autobiography when he was in middle school in the 1980s. And he has continued to study and follow these relationships with regard to Japan and China ever since. Yeah, it was a very, very popular book in China at the time also. Probably the first book that we know of of American entrepreneurs. Professor Brown is an avid consumer of and student of American popular culture and has written on Broadway, literature, and movies. He's also a great active promoter and philanthropic supporter of Drum Corps International and music education generally, and is a travel enthusiast, having visited all the states except for one. And you guys can guess which one he hasn't visited, okay? Mark Frank has a wonderful Chinese name, Feng Ma Ke, and those Ma and Ke both mean jades, right? Beautiful stones. Is the postdoctoral associate and lecturer in the environmental humanities of East Asia at Yale University. He earned his PhD at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and is currently developing a book on the environmental history of the frontier in modern China. Natalia Rodriguez is a graduate student in East Asia language and cultures at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She specializes in anthropology of Japan with a focus on traditional dress in contemporary transnational context. So interesting, huh? Before joining the graduate program at the University of Illinois, she worked in US-Japan grassroots diplomacy and cultural exchange in Japan and Chicago. So as you can see, they collaboratively worked on this exciting project called Yellow Peril Redux. So I will hand off the mic to Dr. Dan, Shao Dan, in order so that you can hear about it.
Okay, thank you, Haiyuan. Let me share the screen. So our project is titled Yellow Peril Redux. Before we talk more about what this project is about, what we have done, and what we are going to do, I would like to ask our host, Michelle, to show some poll questions. Then after we get responses from the audience, from you, we will, based on your responses, tailor our introduction and our future dialogue accordingly.
Yeah, so I see the poll, guys. It says 活动参与调查 Yellow Peril Redux poll questions. So you guys can enter it, and I'm going to do it right now. And it's in both English and Chinese for your convenience. So where did the word redux, what does it mean, Dr. Shao?
What?
What does the word redux mean? R-E-D-U-X.
Redux, coming back.
Coming back.
A occurrence, I would say.
That's right.
Matt and Mark, Natalia, you are English native speakers. Anything to add?
So the majority of our audiences seem to be 64%, right, from first-generation immigrant from Asia, and 80% from East Asia. Wonderful. And most of us have not had any units on Asian American experiences in history or social studies.
And I noticed 12% of our audience came from a non-Asian ethnic or racial group. Thank you for coming. Okay, this is great. And we have friends from Southeast Asia, South Asia, other region too. Thank you for coming. Okay, no, 60%. Okay, no units. Oh, 18%. That's really good. 18% of you who grew up here or went to high school, college here, your history or social studies curriculum included a unit on Asian Americans. That is great. Parents and children discussion. Nice, very nice. 30% often children or grandchildren, you talk to your children, or grandparents or grandparents or grandparents talk to your children. It's great. Yeah, never heard. 30% never heard of this term. 30% heard of it. And the impressive, almost 40% read some articles or books about it, or even studied this topic this year. Very, very grateful. Now we can close. Thank you, Michelle. The basics about our Yellow Peril Redux project, it started from a conference, international conference titled American Cultural Responses to Asian Economic Invasions. Actually, it was Dr. Brown's baby, right? Yeah, he and I, we chatted something we forgot, maybe about alumni organization. And then finally, we noticed that the Academy on Capitalism and Limited Governance at UIU in Urbana-Champaign and the CEPS, Center for East Asian and Pacific Studies, it could provide funds. So we have at this conference. Professor Brown, do you have any more information about this conference to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I think one of our major goals, and one of my major goals all along in studying these issues it's been the idea that we need to look at the relationships between America and countries like China and Japan and others in a much broader lens than we usually do. So we need to take a much more interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. So it can't just be about economics or politics. We need to look at culture, cultural representations, and bring people with different expertise in those areas together. So that's what I think we tried to do at that conference, and start understanding how things like economic change, economic exchanges, and as well as geopolitical concerns and others led to and helped form the kinds of political debates or confrontations that we see now with, for example, with anti-Asian violence.
Yeah, and thanks to this conference, we began to notice some similarities between American cultural responses to Japan's economic rise in the 1980s, 90s, and then to China in the 2000s, especially 2010s, even before the full-scale trade war launched during the past several years. So we wanted to move on to work on a book project. We will talk about that book project later. Then from 2 years ago, 2019, we got financial support from our CEPS. Again, it's Title 6 and IGI, Illinois Global Institute Summer Course Development Grant to help us translate our research into teaching. And here I would like to express our gratitude to Professor Mitsumi Sadler, the director of our Center for East Asian and Pacific Studies. I believe she is among our audience. Thanks to her support, we can move toward that direction. Then we also now, for the coming 1 or 2 years, we will focus on outreach. We will design sub-projects that can help us to promote collaboration between scholars, students, and our local Asian communities, and as well as local high school educators. Back to the course curriculum. This is a course I started to teach in 2019, and I teach this course every fall semester. Some of our students, I know they are here, like Hina Kuwayama, Lu Yiqing, and Yining. And for this course, they took it in fall 2019 and for 2020. They all developed wonderful term papers, such as Hina's project on Yellow Peril Ideology and Racial Rhetoric of Trade Wars with Japan and China, or Yiqing's paper on American views on China during the economic rise of Chinese development. And Yining's paper from last year is on how China tries to say no to the US. And some other students are also among the audience. I won't name all of your names and your term papers, but I would like to share with the audience. I want to say that I'm proud of our college students and how creative, innovative their research on Yellow Peril Redux. These are the basic learning outcomes and objectives. We can come back to this slide. We can discuss more about how to translate research into teaching and how to help our students to study what's going on around us during either a dialogue with Haiyun or during the Q&A. And we also created, with the funding from CEIPS and IGI, we created an outreach website. Now I will pass the podium, microphone or screen to our wonderful graduate student assistants, Mark and Natalia. Mark, are you going to share a screen? I will stop mine.
Sure, I can do that right now. This is the website that's currently in development. And in spring of 2020, Professor Xiao asked me to help her to develop an outreach website for her, an outreach website that would correspond to her Yellow Peril Redux undergraduate course, college course. And so I got to look at her course materials, and basically I wanted to take her amazing college course and turn it into something that anyone could use and that you could use in multiple ways. And so, for example, you could, if you're a college instructor or a high school instructor, you could use this to teach a similar course yourself. If you're an anti-racism activist, you could use some of the materials here to add context to your messaging or to educate the public. And if you're just curious about transnational relations and anti-Asian sentiment, it's designed to be accessible to just about everyone and very user-friendly, ideally. And so what we're looking at here is the homepage. We've called it Yellow Peril Redux, from coolies to cars, trade wars, and coronavirus, kind of indicating the range of topics that we currently cover. And it's designed as a series of learning modules, and each learning module includes certain things. I'll show you an example. Here's a list of our current modules. Some are more developed than others right now. And one that's more developed is this module on Vincent Chin and Japanese cars. And this talks about the murder of Vincent Chin in, I believe it was 1982, which was a landmark, not only an important event, but a landmark legal case in the history of the Asian American experience in the United States. And so what we've done is to provide a few different things. First of all, we've got a narrative essay that ties the whole thing together and gives you some background and tells the story of the murder of Vincent Chin and the subsequent legal case. But this narrative essay draws on a large range of primary sources. And so it was very important to us to also provide those primary sources directly to everyone so that you can read them yourself and come to your own conclusions. We don't just want to tell you what happened. We want you to become a historian and a researcher yourself and look at the primary sources. And so those are at the bottom. Before we get to those, there's also an image gallery. And we try to provide an image gallery in every module so that you can look at visual sources. This first one depicts what was called Japan bashing, the destruction of Japanese manufactured cars in the United States. And in this module, we connect that to the kind of anti-Asian sentiment that resulted in the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982. Here's Vincent Chin himself. And here's a photograph by the Asian American photographer Corky Lee, who died, I believe, this year, and just a prolific photographer of Asian American activism, Chinese American activism in particular. Finally, at the bottom, we've got our primary sources, primary and secondary sources, and you'll be able to browse these. Some of them are possibly restricted to people with access to a university library. Others are open access. But we try to include links wherever possible so that you can click through them and read them yourself. And then finally, at the bottom, we include discussion questions. So if you're using this to teach a course, whether it's a high school course or a college course, you can use our discussion questions to conduct a discussion with your students. I'm afraid this module doesn't have a full set of discussion questions yet, but that's coming, and we're going to try to do that with every module. I sort of set up the website at the beginning, but then Natalia came on board and did a lot of the legwork and really filled out a lot of the modules herself. So I think we'll ask her, right, to talk about the work that she's done working with undergrads and with Professors Shao and Matt Brown on setting up the various modules.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. And thanks to your wonderful aesthetic sense and design of sort of the basic setup of the website, we've been able to fill it out a lot more with guidance from our PIs and also from the students from the undergraduate courses. So my main role with this project, the website and the Yellow Peril Redux project in general, has been not only to supplement some of the main undergraduate course readings with sources that represent perspectives from outside the US, from Japan or from China, but also to coordinate with our undergraduate researchers, as well as the activities of the students in the Yellow Peril Redux class to make the course materials and these new supplementary readings available via our outreach website that Mark has crafted so nicely. So this has involved two main projects. The first, as I mentioned, has been to find primary sources such as newspaper articles and op-eds that would give students or visitors to the website a feel for how people on the ground have experienced the effects of these economic friction between the US and Japan or US and China at a grassroots level. And then with these supplementary sources that are not just academic, we hope to illustrate how even all throughout history, economic relations, as well as political rhetoric about them have always affected the experience of Asians and Asian Americans at the grassroots level. A second aspect to this website project has been students in the Yellow Peril Redux course to think about how they would communicate what they learned in the class. So we did this by having students formulate their own discussion questions about the readings, and then student leaders and undergraduate researchers from our team would gather the best questions to be provided as a resource on our outreach website. And as Mark mentioned, some of these are still under development after feedback from the students. Another piece of this is that as students read the course materials, we asked some of our undergraduate researchers to just write down their thoughts, write down short summaries or annotations about the readings so that we could provide these short summaries of the materials so visitors to our website can more easily see what kinds of sources are available. So as Mark mentioned, our overall vision is just to make these sources and these resources, these readings more accessible to a wider public and to kind of distribute these university knowledge to be readable by anyone. So yeah, some of the challenges that remain, as everyone knows, the situation continues to evolve really quickly, especially now. So we'll need to figure out a sustainable way to continue providing new readings and updating the website even as current students graduate and go on to their next stage of their career. And then another piece of this will be figuring out how to make some of the sources that are only available to university members more widely available. So figuring out the copyright issues. Thanks so much.
It's a wonderful website. So for now, is it only available to UIUC members?
For currently, because we still have some copyright challenges here, but I will talk about how we will handle it. Now let's go back to the slide. Look at this. Here we have the challenge of copyright. And also because Mark already left, now is working at Yale. And Natalia will be leaving for UC Santa Barbara. So we also have a challenge that is about maintenance and sustainability. That's our plan to fix, to take the challenge these in the coming couple of years. So this is our project plan for the next year. Here we have the overview. So we are applying for fundings on campus and off campus. And we are explaining in our proposal about why our project is important. Although we started like 10 years ago, but now it is high time to finish this project. And we want to remind our future funding reviewers that it's important to understand anti-Asian racism and the Yellow Peril Redux against the background of the political and economic rise of Japan and China last century. And here we have 4 major tasks to finish. The first is we want to finish across the book, and it's not only scholarly, but also we want to make it accessible to non-specialists and policymakers to help educate on the crucial contemporary issue of Yellow Peril Redux, and we will publish with an academic press. Okay, and the second task here, we want to expand what Mark and Natalia helped to build. We want to include more primary, secondary sources, and we want to create more modules. And we provide research tools with help from our librarians. 2 librarians will join our team in the coming year. So they will help us to provide research tools at the website and also help us to set up links to library collections. And a local Chinese community leader, Dr. Yan Wang, he will help us, especially our students, to create a digital exhibition of local Asian American experiences. Also will be accessible at our website. Okay. Task 3, we will continue to develop curriculum here, and we will help students to learn from the local communities. We don't, when we talk about learning, we often think about teachers, professors. We distribute our knowledge to the local people, but now we want to understand knowledge making and learning in terms of mutual learning, reciprocal learning. So we want to learn and help the students learn from our local Asian communities and organizations. Okay. Then we also find associate director in our College of Education who will help us to develop a summer workshop where we will share our teaching materials, teaching strategies, as well as some research materials with local high school teachers, because the Illinois Lower House just passed the Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History Act on April 14th. And this TEACH Act is going to Illinois Senate. If it is passed at the Senate, then Illinois will be the first state in America that mandates the teaching of Asian American history in public schools. And by the way, why this project at UIUC, we have a long history of intellectual, academic, cultural exchange with China. And you can see the similarities between the quads at UIUC and at Tsinghua On the left of the screen is Tsinghua. This is UIUC. And thanks to one of our former presidents, university president, Edmund James, he helped to persuade the US government to return the Boxer indemnity, 就是庚子赔款议和权以后的 Boxer indemnity. Well, return part of it to China and use it to build higher education institutions. And Tsinghua University came into being with a returned Boxer indemnity. And Edmund once wrote in a memorandum saying that the nation which succeeds in educating the young Chinese of the present generation will be the nation which, for a given expenditure of effort, will reap the largest possible returns in moral, intellectual, and commercial influence. Definitely, as he predicted more than 100 years ago, well, this country, USA, has definitely reaped the largest possible returns in moral, intellectual, and commercial influence in the past century. So for us, our generation in this era, while we are continuously making contribution to the US, we are eagerly reviewing our history and experiences here and in the global context of the US-Asian relations. So with more reflection on the past and present, we will take further action to achieve more racial equality, create more inclusive cultures, and promote more racial equity for Asians and Asian Americans in this era. Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, by the way, these are numbers about Chinese students at UIUC. Okay, this is for 2020. More than 4,000. But in 2017, we have more than 5,000 Chinese students at UIUC. Okay. Then I will pass the podium to Haiyun.
Thank you so much. Such a rich presentation that many of us in the audience, including me, are eager to really be able to see the material that you guys have researched as well as presented. And Yuan She will let people know when they became available. And I, again, want to thank the expert to come in today to show us the curriculum, as well as maybe we can discuss something that has been on my mind and on many Asian Americans' mind for a long time, given the current culture and economic status of this country. Let me just dive into some of the questions I had after watching it. So currently, with the rampant racism, as well as animosity felt by the Asian American community, maybe Matthew can answer this question. Is this a unique time in history, or has it happened before? If it has, how is it different from what happened in the past? In the curriculum, you guys often make the comparison with the Japanese quote unquote invasion in the 1980s. So is this a continuation of the same?
I definitely think you would say there are similarities, but there are also important differences between the relationship between the United States and Japan in the 1980s and 90s, and then the United States and China in the 21st century. And it's certainly the case that everywhere around the world where we see large attempts to integrate different populations, you often have episodes of violence. So this is not something unique, per se, to these two relationships.
Yeah.
I think the biggest lesson I've taken away from this, and the biggest frustration to me, is that the origin of a lot of these debates in the United States about Japan in the 80s and 90s, or China today, begins with the idea of a trade war. And that's to someone as an economist like me, a very misleading and a very unfortunate terminology, because trade is mutually beneficial. We don't engage in trade with China or Japan out of conflict or war. We engage in exchange because we are each made better off by doing it. And so one of the biggest challenges is that we we couch the discussions of these big economic interchanges in the language of war, and it takes what is a very wonderful thing and puts a very negative light on it. So, for example, since 1980, particularly the United States, China, Japan, and India, if you look at those four major global leading economies, you've seen with their international growth and integration, the largest by far increase in people being lifted out of poverty in the history of the world. I mean, it dwarfs by orders of magnitude any improvements in standard of living we saw during the first decades of the Industrial Revolution. And so you've had an enormous, just, world historic, unprecedented improvement in living standards for hundreds of millions and literally billions of people. Right. And unfortunately, that gets talked about, in a language of conflict. And then you add on to that more recently with the relationship with China, this emergence of kind of the geopolitical contest that seems to be emerging now with the pivot to Asia, as the U.S. has caused it, has referred to it, the movement away from the focus on the war on terrorism in the Middle East. And so that adds an actual real potential, angle of conflict and potential military conflict. Right. But I think even that is made worse by the fact that we're starting from a foundation where these very wonderful exchanges and interactions in terms of economics and education and culture are also described negatively. So I think, it's not something new, but it's something that has a unique twist in the sense that the great economic integration and benefits we've seen are also now being combined with this potential geopolitical conflict. And then, of course, out of the blue, the pandemic that gets added onto that and kind of threw, fuel onto the fire. So that's how I see it as being unique currently.
Yeah, it seems like there's a very long-term, when I study, say, dynamic systems, there are very long-term effects that cast very long shadows, hundreds of years. And then there are shorter-term events, which as short as, say, COVID has been only in the last year, but they all add up to the current peak, so to speak, of the event. And I was going to comment also with the obvious benefit of the UIUC's promotion of the Chinese youth getting the education. And we've all been we're the generation that benefited from it. So that's a wonderful framework that you put it, which is also where I, as a enthusiast of history, wants to look at. So that's wonderful that you guys are putting it in a 100-year or 200-year framework instead of just 5 years. And I also think that the language that we use, like you said, is particularly pertinent, because if we say it as a war, then we start to have the analogy of weapon, analogy of gaps or trenches, instead of a bridge, right? Where we are able to bridge places. Yeah. So
and it creates the idea of winners and losers, which is the exact opposite of what voluntary mutual trade is about. Exactly. And the reason these countries have gotten so much wealthier the last 40 years is because of mutually beneficial gains from trade. One country hasn't been winning at the other's expense, but when we talk about it in war, you think about that. So you get what is a very good thing and a very beneficial thing to all countries being talked about and thought about in a way that you think somebody has to lose in order for somebody to win, and that's exactly right. Wrong.
It portrayed it as a zero-sum game, while in fact we're making a huge more sum, so to speak. In Chinese, we say "ba bing zuo da," so everybody will not go hungry. In fact, that leads me to looking at you guys' experience. I was going to ask you guys, in your personal experience, how you see the element of cooperation versus the animosity in your own experience. For instance, I know Dr. Mark Frank has lived in China for many years, And you are someone who's the opposite from me and Dr. Shao, maybe that, immigrated from China to the US. You did the opposite. How did you feel, especially how the climate, quote unquote, has changed in your experience there?
Yeah, so the last time I've lived in China for about 5 years in total. And I left just at the beginning of the Trump era. And I was there at a very particular time, of course, but my experience was very positive. So, I was welcomed and helped by so many people in Beijing and Chengdu, like Michelle and Pat. And so it really breaks my heart when people don't have that experience coming to the United States and have to face violence and racism. And so to give one example, most of my experiences were very positive. For example, I got pulled over by an old man in an alleyway one time when I was coming out of the Sichuan archives where I was doing my research. And he went like this, and I thought, uh-oh, what's he going to say to me? And he said, he basically in World War II, your country and my country, well, after I told him I was American, he said, in World War II, your country and my country were friends. We fought together. And so, I like your country. But I think that in the past 4 years in particular, that relationship has soured a little bit in my understanding. I haven't been in China since 2017, but the leadership of both the PRC and the United States uses the other side as a scare tactic, I think, almost. And this is continuing, it was bad under Trump, and it's continuing under Biden, I think, unfortunately. In his first address to Congress, he talked about beating China at the production war. And I guess one thing I've learned from this project is that that sort of antagonizing the Chinese state or the Japanese state slides very easily into antagonizing Chinese or Japanese people, even if that's unintentional. This idea that you can be tough on the Chinese government but love the Chinese people doesn't work very well in practice unless you're really careful about your messaging. And so I think that, for example, the murder of Vincent Chin that we just talked about was related to the negative attitudes towards Japanese auto producers, which fueled anti-Japanese sentiment and then even anti-Asian violence beyond the U.S.-Japan relationship. And so I think one of my big takeaways from this project is that political leaders need to be very careful about their messaging because it tends to tap into this underlying racism that hasn't gone away.
Here we have also have a quick note to add to Mark, and also a response to Haiying's question about change. In fact, during past 2 decades also, China also began to accept more and more immigrants from different religious and racial backgrounds. Unfortunately, in fact, we as perhaps sometimes we are victims of racism, but sometimes we need to be careful that we don't also hold our racial bias against other groups. I read some anthropological research on African immigrants in Guangdong, especially Guangzhou city. Well, pretty serious too. And some online Chinese posters, they never shy, they are not shy about racist rhetoric or accusation at all. So this is a very big change. This is different from, Haiying, when we were graduate students, China didn't have that many immigrants from foreign countries. Now, I think we need to be alert to this kind of reversed racism.
I think that's why talking about these things is actually the beginning of acknowledging the existence of all the racial biases in our own mind, every one of us. So I don't actually agree with Chloe Zhao's comment in her Oscar award that she says in Chinese, 人之初性本善. I actually don't agree with that because I agree with Xunzi when he thinks that when human, for Matthew, who doesn't know, it just means when you're born, you're naturally good. I don't agree with that. I think that Xunzi is much more practical, saying that whenever we are ignorant, that we naturally have all these biases and narrow-mindedness, that education is the only way to dispel it. So I was going to say a small comment with the Chinese, racism/tribalism in where I grew up in Shanghai. That is rampant, not between, say, an Asian person and a African American or African person. It's just between people who speak slightly different dialects. Speaking Shanghainese versus some other dialect 100 kilometers, 100 kilometers away. So we are very good at that if we do not control our urge. And I think just like when we unleash when we have anger and when we have fear, we are easily influenced by the media as well as by the government, who wants to use those to govern us more easily. I just want to mention that I was watching a Senate committee on a recent report from the National Institute of Health, where they also framed the Chinese American biologists like me, or like many of us, as sent by the government, infiltrating the US academia, working here for 10 years. I'm like, well, that applied to me and applied to Dr. Shao also. So that's a very, I think that kind of bombardment of the media, as well as the public officials that we elected, are infiltrating in our mind. So I was going to also ask that sometimes I also see in other universities with such a kind of project, but I want to ask whether for you guys, what's so unique about this project, and with your take on this, the often discussed the yellow peril. One of you can answer.
Well, from my perspective, I think I hinted at this earlier, but I think the biggest challenge is to look at these issues from many different perspectives in many different academic disciplines. And so, for example, just to follow up on points that you and Mark both just made, racism and mistrust of people that are different than you is common around the world, throughout human civilization, right? But one of the things we see when we study economic systems and all different kinds of human outcomes and cooperation and racism is that the more voluntary economic exchange there is between groups of people, the less racism there is, the more understanding there is, the more concern there is for other people that are different than you. And so that's another reason I get so frustrated to hear the economic terminology turned into one of competition, because we learn about people and we start to care about people when we start to trade with them and interact with them, and we start to see that we have shared humanity and shared experiences.
We eat their food, right?
Yeah, and then the other thing, just really quickly, is that it gets back to Mark's point about language, which the more I study this issue, the more I'm convinced the language and how we talk about it is crucial, is because I remember this growing up in the 80s, and I see it now today. We talk about Japan doing something, or we talk about the United States doing something, or we talk about China doing something. Well, 330 million Americans don't do anything. And certainly 1.3 billion Chinese people don't do anything, right? And so I think I mean, we all do that out of shorthand. It's just a limitation of language in our brains, but we need to be very careful when we talk about serious concerns to not say, well, the Chinese are, our competitors geopolitically. Well, maybe the leadership of the PLA and certain higher ranking officials in the Communist Party are pursuing policies that are potentially dangerous to the United States or to Taiwan or Japan or whatever the case may be. But when we say it's China, we say it's 1.3 billion people. And that's a very, in my mind, not only very inaccurate, but very unfortunate, gross, oversimplification. And the same thing goes the other direction. We said that about America. Most Americans have no idea what the US government is doing in other parts of the world, just like most Chinese citizens probably have no idea what the Chinese leadership is doing in the South China Sea, except for what they're told through state media. So I think we need to focus a lot on how we talk about things and try to educate people to think about the fact that when you say things like China did something or Japan did something, the US did something, you're really creating a perception that there's this homogeneous mass of 1 billion people that are all working against you. And that's not true. I mean, it's a very, if you take the case of, Chinese geopolitical policy right now, it's a very small group of people. And some observers would say it's a group of people who are mainly focused on maintaining their internal power base. It's not 1.3 billion Chinese people trying to fight the United States or Japan. And I think that kind of oversimplification of language gets lost in most of the discussions I see about these issues. And I think to really make progress and to educate people, that's one of the big things we have to do is to distinguish the geopolitical or the political and government leadership actions from the vast majority of the people. And the vast majority of the people want to feed their kids and have a good life and build for the future, not worry about competing interest over sea lanes or things like that.
Yeah. I was going to also ask some of you, because you guys have such diverse ethnic background also, that, for example, I see in the module you just shared, you have some Japanese influence and you have some discussion with Chinese. Natalia, I know you are Filipino American, is that right? But you are expert in Japanese dresses. So how was your experience as a Filipino? How do you see it into this curriculum? How does your growing up help you understand issues like this?
Thank you so much. I think maybe my growing up experiences as a Filipino American in California, I grew up in Southern California, have been to really have the sort of personal bodily experience of being seen as different by classmates, people not really knowing what kind of Asian I am or if I'm Asian at all. And then I think we hit on earlier in the poll, many of us didn't have any Asian experiences or Asian American experiences represented in our history classes or other classes during elementary through high school. So for me, that gap in representation, as well as the personal experience of, feeling like, do I really belong in the US? Do other people think I belong here or I'm American? Has fueled the urgency of this project for me. So especially as I and other classmates have faced more discrimination or kind of scary experiences during COVID, it's been really encouraging to work together with this team of researchers to address one of the root problems, which is how we talk about Asians and Asian American contributions to the US, whether it's as citizens or as residents or in terms of economic exchange, and kind of addressing the lack of representation in our education system.
Right. I mean, even that word Asian American is a recent invention, because we're not saying Euro American anymore, Europe American anymore, European American. So you can hear that sometimes it feels like we're all lumped together, right? That the Vincent Cheng case is exactly that he was mistaken to be a Japanese. So he was basically shouldering the hatred of those criminals on him as a hatred of Japanese car makers, not even as Japanese people. Yeah. So it's rather important that we not only acknowledge our different, but realize we have to bind together. Otherwise, we are even a smaller minority. So I was going to ask, in the current situation, do you see your curriculum as particularly popular, Dr. Shao, in the university? And what do your university plan to do in support you guys?
I would like to know more from our
You assign them.
university administrators. I would say that our university has been very supportive in terms of providing very good amount of funding to support research, teaching, and outreach projects that will help to promote racial equality and equity. For example, recently we have a program that aims to call for proposals from researchers that can provide a good academic understanding of systematic racial bias or discrimination and how to change structurally the racial problems we are having. And also they have other fundings promote interdisciplinary and intersectional collaboration between scholars. And they highly recommend that we develop creative ways to collaborate with our staff members, students, and local community leaders, not just elitish scholars talking to each other, but more like we the people work together. And this is what really like about our university leaders support.
Well, what I see sometimes is my being slightly bilingual, at least I can read Chinese speaking and read English and roughly speaking it. There seems to be gaps between, say, American experts in who speak Chinese only and the so-called China hands here who speaks, good Chinese, but their depth into the Chinese material is quite limited. And now you're adding a Japanese, aspect. So do you guys do a lot of translation? Or are you pulling people in to do more translation?
Yes, that's the inherent nature of East Asian studies as well as other subfields in area studies. For example, in my department, PhD students are required to take second East Asian language courses. For example, even like Natalia, her major research language is Japanese, but when she goes to a PhD program, she has to take either Korean or Chinese language courses. Natalia, are you taking Korean already or Chinese?
Yes, I'm finishing up second year Korean.
Hey,
good job.
And Mark also take Tibetan language courses, and also Nihongo Choto, a little bit Japanese, right? Yeah. So in area studies, it's kind of you have to. With only 2 languages, not enough. You have to have 3, 4, whatever. Some students who are studying northeastern China, they even have to take Russian language training. So. My understanding that especially amongst American students and young scholars in East Asian studies, from early 20th century, many outstanding scholars are multilingual. And for example, before Chinese scholars devoted their time into Manchu reading, a lot of American, European, and Japanese scholars had already studied Manchu language scripts. So this is kind of international, I would say kind of early globalization of academic training and research. So I don't have much concern about their language skills at all. What my concern perhaps would be, no matter how many languages a scholar acquires, what we have to fight all our life, no matter Chinese native speakers or Japanese native speakers or Tibetan native speakers, English, we have to remind ourselves how much influence from some ideological, religious, cultural biases we just take for granted. We are not aware, we're unaware of them. That is our lifetime training. So Mark and Matt and Natalie, if you have anything to chip in, your time.
I guess I would just add that I think that what makes this project, there's so many great projects by activists and scholars on the history of anti-Asian racism. Mm-hmm. And I think what makes this team distinctive is our particular specialties. And so, Matt's economic knowledge, but also the rest of us are coming from a background in East Asian studies, and we're able to draw on sources in East Asian languages, Chinese and Japanese chiefly, and to kind of look at the problem from those perspectives.
Right.
And that, oftentimes, there seems to be an artificial divide between Asian American studies and East Asian studies.
Oh, really? Asian American study and East Asian studies are separate? It's like in physics, solid state and quantum mechanics are separate, but that can't be because, they all use the same principle.
That's a good point. That's why our project somehow differs from Asian American approaches. They often focus more on domestic issues that caused or are influenced by racism. So that's why at the beginning of the event, I reminded the audience that we want to highlight, foreground the U.S., East Asian, international, especially political, economic relations in our study of the yellow Peril Redux problem. We cannot just focus on domestic issues here within this country if we want to understand better why anti-Asian rhetoric and actions here in recent years are coming back. We need to study the global context.
Right. I was going to mention another favorite daughter of the UIUC, which is Iris Chan. Her parents taught there, I believe, for many years, and she was born there, and she went to school there for college, right? Journalism. I can see that her path has been similar to many Asian American, where she was interested in both the history of China as itself, when she discussed things with the Nanking rape, the rape of Nanking. Also, she is interested in the relationship that affects one single person, like a physicist, Chen Xuesen, that she wrote the biography on, as well as the Asian American history, Chinese American. I think she wrote a history on that. So I have a lot of hope as a teacher of young children that the generation that grew up here, who are immersed both in the American culture as well as having the influence of their ancestors and their parents in Eastern Asian culture, they will be able to do a lot of contribution to this kind of area. Like Natalia is one of them, right? Your generation, you're like second generation or multi-generation Asian American. That's great. So what do you guys see as, maybe this will be my last question, and we can open the floor to more questions from the audience. One of my, what I've been always thinking, especially given the severity of the recent anti-Asian hate, is what we individual can do to make a difference in our surrounding as well as in the bigger picture. So you guys can go around, whoever decide to answer this question.
I mean, that's an enormously difficult question.
Yeah.
It's extremely important, but one of the things, and I've probably already hinted at this, but as a business professor, one of the things I try to do most often is emphasize the beneficial nature of these international relationships, because I think that is, in addition to just the kind of inherent human, ability to see differences in people, the assumption that somehow the international economic exchanges are bad or are zero sum is an enormous problem. And so I try to constantly focus on that. One of my biggest frustrations, and one of the things I would like everybody to do that's listening to this, and everybody anywhere to do is to talk about the enormous gains in human well-being that have occurred the last 40 years since economic liberalization started in China in 1980, and India in 1981, and in other parts of Southeast Asia, and then the US and Japan and Australia played major roles in those things. But that really is, I mean, that should, in my mind, be the biggest human story of the last half century. I mean, it's the biggest, most sustained, important increase in human living standards in the entire history of our species. And I don't hear anybody other than me talking about it. And I'm not saying I have some unique insight. I'm just obsessed with it because of this topic. And now
You're an economist, right? You talk about it.
There's another huge overarching story about the world today, which is climate change. And that gets a lot of attention, and it gets a lot of attention because it's negative. But I think, just as big and just as world historic, we should be talking about the fact that more so than any other time in human history, more people have been lifted out of poverty, and they've been able to realize, self-respect and dignity and high living standards, and, live long enough to see their grandchildren, and all these other amazing things that have happened in the last 40 years because of these economic relationships. And to me, that is the biggest story that's happened in my lifetime. And I think we should all be talking about it, and I don't hear anybody talking about it. And I think if it got as much attention as the other huge story, which is climate change, I think that could have an enormous impact on people's understanding and views about race and these relationships. But we're walking through one of the biggest stories in human history, and we're just not even acknowledging it. Yeah. And I think if we did, we would make an enormous improvement in our ability to see and understand and appreciate our shared, humanity and experiences.
Believe it or not, I do talk about it in my math classes.
Oh, good.
To the kids, because that is the foundation of why math actually promoted STEM in order to make the huge of a, specialization as well as the trading, like you said. So I think that you're absolutely right. I have seen it talked about maybe 10 years ago among my folks, say globalization, whether it's better or worse. But in the recent years, the media in each country, I don't know why, but they seem to be really nothing but ambulance chasers now. I'm not talking about, you can't report death. Of course you do, but you need to do investigative reporting that are longer term, say as long as 10 years, 20 years, instead of just yesterday, what happened. And everybody is copying off each other. We can go on forever, but I want to let some of you guys chime in on what you think that we can do as individuals.
Yeah, for me, it's like, everyone, we have different identities. So for me, as a researcher, scholar, what I should do, I need to think about how to find my collaborators in other disciplines. I found Matt from business economics, and I found librarians at UIUC, and I wish I could also find, by the way, one of the librarians is an expert on global relations studies, and I wish I could find more collaborators from Asian American studies. As one of our audience, Sun Weiming, mentioned, Asian American studies, East Asian studies are always separate. They really talk to each other. Yes, that's why I have been developing collaboration with some potential friends in that field. And also, as a scholar, I have to think about my disciplinarity. That is how I was trained, what I can do from my disciplinary field. Then as an educator in higher education, what I can do for my college students and graduate students. That's another concern I have been working on. And also as a mom of 2 children, what I can teach to my children. As a community member, what I can do to contribute to community building at local level and state level, or even national level. Also, I would like also to take this opportunity here at Yuanshe. I would like to listen to our audience. What suggestion you would like to give us on how to promote academic community collaborations, communications, and how we can find community members to teach us, scholars and students, and how we can collaborate to promote racial equity for the always invisible Asians and Asian Americans. I want to include Asians here because, on UIUC campus and many college towns, Asians, although they are not Asian Americans,
That's right.
they actually also, sometimes have to bear some discriminative treatment or even
much so.
biases. So here, that's my quick answer to hiring. Okay.
Thank you. So should I start with reading the audience's question? Some of those are fantastic. They should come and be the guests sometimes. We should write down their names so we can type them in. Let me start with one of the questions. It says, thank you for this fantastic panel discussion. Could you talk a bit of different perspectives from the community about how to teach Asian American history? For example, I think Dr. Shao mentioned about the Illinois HAAC, was that what's it called? Teach, TEAACH proposal or the bill. Right now in California has passed legislation on teaching ethnic studies in K-12 and California State University system. There have been controversies surrounding the critical race theory behind the K-12 model curriculum. Would you mind sharing more about, for example, what do you think of it as the controversy, or what do you think of the ethnic study as a part of a curriculum?
Yeah, I wish we could have Dr. Liu Wei, who will be our expert from our College of Education here. She will help us to develop curriculum strategies for K-12, especially high school teachers, because we cannot, different age, they have different learning capacities, and we need to adopt different teaching strategies. That's why for the next 2 years, we focus on high school teachers, because in high schools in Illinois, we do have history and social studies curriculum that already have units on African Americans, other ethnic groups and racial groups and religious groups. So far, not many schools, I would say few schools, have a formal unit on Asian Americans yet. So on this part, we need to follow this collaborator, Dr. Liu Wei's guidance.
We'll write her name down.
Yes. I regret, maybe next year we can come back to talk about what we have done from, this perspective. As about the controversies, I would like to learn more. What controversies have been discussed in California? I'm curious.
For the limited knowledge that I have, all I know is years ago, San Mateo, which is a county in California, has already had ethnic studies as in their high school graduation requirement. So every student has to take ethnic studies, but it doesn't have to be your own. So me as a Chinese American can take Nigerian history. But recently, I think they were, actually, it's really interesting because it's right before COVID where California was proposing it. So I think it's quite, it's quite avant-garde of them to do it. Yet they met a lot of pushback by first-generation Chinese Americans. And right as the time that they are gathering steam to do the protesting, COVID hit. And suddenly the whole landscape changed, that every one of us became called Kung Flu or other things, that we are the ones that are the most yellow, the most peril there is. So I don't know what controversy right now exists. I haven't heard anything new. Yeah. So the second most popular question is, are you looking for partner, faculty, researcher, educator, librarians from other institutions to help? I think Mark and Natalia leaving, now you guys can have a lot of interviews.
Yeah, we still want to keep Natalia and Mark, but you know, it depends on the organizations who give us research and teaching fund. We have to figure out a way, like it's HR problem, figure out a way to pay non-UIUC people. I do get a message from Michelle about volunteer opportunities. Definitely, if anybody would like to volunteer or to share, or even just come to my class not next year, in the coming fall, to talk about your experiences with my students, please contact me. My email address is danshao, DANSHAO @illinois.edu.
Right.
And you can find me online. Yeah.
We will post some of these links in our final message from Yuan-She, as well as some of the links that we discussed. Yeah. I want to share a screen on one ethnic studies website where actually my face is in this picture. It's a local community college called De Anza College, right down the street from us, where we have what's called Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. And it's one of the only programs that connects both Asian American as well as Hispanic Americans. That we have two teachers. One is Asian, the other is Hispanic, and we learned a whole lot of ethnic studies that really was very beneficial, at least for me, as someone who's first generation, never took any classes in graduate school on these subjects. So I will just put it out there. Meanwhile, I'll look further at the questions that people have. I love this one. A recent novel called 2034 has gained a lot of popularity. It's about a naval clash between the US and China in the South Sea in 2034. Now, I think this question is twofold. One is, what do you really see in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, given the current geopolitical as well as economic rhetoric, right? Both places are perpetrating. Second is, what's your take on the impact of popular culture, say movies, TV shows, on people's negative view about China? I think Matthew is perfect in answering this question on both sides, but everybody else can chime in.
Well, I will say, take the recent Godzilla movie that came out this year. Godzilla attacking, Hong Kong instead of Japan for the first time. China's now the world's second largest movie market, and I think things, that increase in trans, national cultural consumption can be very good. You can learn a lot about people through popular culture, and Hollywood movie makers have gotten some criticism for some of the things they've done, but I think in general, it's a good idea to make popular culture that can be consumed across borders, and so we can learn more about each other. So I think in that way, the increasing the continuing enormous volumes of trade and increasing cultural exchanges are going to be very good. In terms of the potential military and geopolitical conflicts, that's the huge question, because it's very different than the US-Soviet Union geopolitical competition, because with the Soviet Union, it was just a geopolitical competition. There wasn't this enormous economic cooperation. So with China, the US has, they each share their two most important economic partners, and they're also, their leadership to some extent is establishing themselves as major geopolitical rivals. But to me, I guess I'm more optimistic on the geopolitical front, because the potential cost is just uncalculably enormous to breaking that economic relationship. I think a lot of what we see now, I'm definitely not an expert on internal Chinese politics, but I think a lot of what we see now is driven by, a small number of people trying to maintain power. And I think as that leadership passes, hopefully we'll go back to leadership that was, more in favor of liberalization like China enjoyed between 1980 and, 2010 or so. But my big hope is that even though there's a lot of growing geopolitical tension and, discussions of military tension, at the end of the day, you never had a direct military confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And, the game theory behind that was because it could escalate so much that the nuclear war would be unwinnable. But with China, you not only have that game theory, consideration discouraging conflict, but you also have this enormous economic consideration where just, the entire populations of both of those countries, all their business leaders have enormous incentives to try to exert influence to prevent that kind of conflict from happening. So I'm pretty optimistic about the geopolitical rivalry. I don't think it's going to get to the extent that it got with the Soviet Union. I could be wrong, but I think the economic interchange and the cultural interchange are enormously powerful in shaping how people interact. And that's, even though there's been a lot of negativity, I in the long run, I'm still very optimistic about the relationship.
That's great. Yeah, I want to be a cautious optimist. Otherwise, how do we survive this, this world, right? I also we haven't even gotten into yet where the popular culture of Japan, as well as Korea in the last 20 years has been huge influence on the people's view of those people. They are still the same genetically, they haven't changed for the last 5,000 years is nothing, right? Compared to a viral mutant. But the view of different countries on those people is completely different. So I completely agree with you that the Oscar, Back to the Culture, gave me so much hope that there are so many women of color have gotten the award. One of my, I want to mention another question, but it's related to one of my actually acquaintance said that about immigration. They said, do you think the current immigration policy limiting immigrants from Asian countries, mostly like China and India, by putting per country cap on the yearly quota, ignoring the total number of population in those countries and the huge diversity within those countries, is also a symbol of historical anti-Asian policy in the hidden form? I'm looking at your module. You talked about it somewhere, right, guys? Was there any immigration discussion on that?
What do you mean immigration?
The historical immigration.
Definitely, we study immigration laws at my class, and we compare also. We also study the Anti-Hate Crime Act from the 1990s Obama, early 2000s Obama administration. And so we also read the original legal documents, such as the Expulsion Act against Chinese immigrants. So we try to provide these primary sources to not only college students. We want to find a way, kind of pedagogical strategies that can tailor those difficult primary sources for high school use, high school teaching, or even, if possible, for middle school teaching. So we are still learning and still creating more pedagogical teaching methods.
Yeah, I think I always look at the Chinese word 危机, right? We keep on talking about it. 危 means danger, 机 means opportunity, 危机 means crisis. Without the current accumulation of all these events that come together, we wouldn't have such a interest in the things that we are looking at right now. So in a way, it's really good that people are hungry for these, information and want to ask the question why things happen the way they did, and what is happening now, and what is going to happen in the future. So I really want to thank my panelists, because our time is almost up, that they spend a beautiful Sunday afternoon talking with us on issues that really is very close to our heart. I think that only through discussion, when we Chinese say, 真理越辩越明, the more you discuss something, the more clear we have in our mind. Again, we go back to the Confucius and Mencius time in the Chinese 战国, the warring states period, when there's lots of different philosophy going on. And I'm hoping that the current crisis will bring us out of our woman or man cave in order to discuss with each other such issues. So I certainly learned a great deal. And I also really appreciate the audience by actively participating in the discussion to show that we Asian Americans are definitely not the, the ethnic group without a voice. In fact, we want to have a lot of voice. And I believe talks like this involving academia, government officials, local grassroots effort like Yuan She, the Society of Heart's Delight, will bring everybody to come together, so that the more we're aware and discuss the situation, the more we know what to do in the future. I'm also excited to announce our next fireside chat on behalf of the Society of Heart's Delight. Our guest will be the celebrated Chinese-British writer, wow, exciting, and journalist, Xue Xingran, who is the founder of the London-based charity, the Mother's Bridge of Love. Yeah, Dr. Shao knows her. Dr. Shao, I'll see you next month. Huh? She frequently contributes to BBC, The Guardian, and many other leading media in Europe and the US. Her books have been translated into more than 30 different languages. In our conversation, she'll discuss topics, not me personally, but in Yuan She's conversation with her, she'll discuss topics such as the cultural exchange between China and the West, identity and contribution of immigrants, and women's rights. So I'll speak it in Chinese, Mandarin for people who is interested. 愚园社下期对话的嘉宾是英籍华裔作家薛欣然，她是英国慈善机构母爱桥的创始人，被卫报选为英国2019年杰出女性。她的著作被翻译成30多种语言，她还是包括 BBC 在内的主流媒体的文化顾问和时事评论专家。对话的内容涉及中西文化交流、移民的身份认同及自我实现等话题。See, as I promised, we'll keep on discussing these issues that are dear to our heart. So thank you very much, everybody, for a wonderful discussion. And if Michelle has any announcement, you're welcome to make them. This is only the beginning of the discussion and the friendship, as in the end of that movie, everybody remember, right? This will be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Thank you, everyone. Such a wonderful discussion. Yeah, I was away before.
Okay.
Let's stay tuned and follow us on our social media. Thank you so much for all our guests and our Dr. Zhang's excellent, wonderful job of moderating. See you.
Actually, Michelle, is there a way I can send some of these links that I collected that I find relevant to the panelists and attendees? Yeah, I'll do that right now. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
I was going to share, which I forgot. I was going to share another link of people, especially as a teacher. I always am looking for great material to read. And I'm going to share a book list of Yuan She's member. How do I share? Where is it? Oh, I saw
we can see it. You can share the link and the.
Oh, you already saw it on
Yeah.
my. Yeah. So these books are wonderful, and they also have an English version for people who can't read Mandarin.
Yeah, it's on our website. The English version.
Oh, it's the same.
On our website. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's on your website. Exactly. And I also saw another. I also want to chime in for one of my effort as an activist in translating Atlantic Magazine's cover story to Chinese so that we can reach more audience. So you're welcome to look at that. And finally, another link. Oh, I don't think this is this is my own links, but we'll be able to, if you send me an email, I'll be able to email it to you, which is another AAPI theme book list. Yeah, I'll just put my email here if people want to reach me. And those of you who would like to share any links or any interesting information, like Dr. Brown, which state he didn't go to out of the 50 states? You guys.
Want me to answer that now?
Yes.
It's Vermont.
What's wrong with Vermont?
It's just not on the way to anywhere. So I
think if you ever want to escape to Canada, that's the route.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So anybody with any link are welcome to post. And I'm looking at what I want to discuss.
Michelle, I have a question. I remember you mentioned you are inviting Elena Zia, the lawyer activist for Vincent Chen case, to your event, to one of your events.
Oh, we are planning to. Helen Zia.
Great. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I promised to mention Iris Chen. I forgot to mention Helen Zia and many other. I think next time in Yuan She's talk, the woman angle is so particularly interesting to me, where a lot of the activists, especially first generation, started out or have more percentage of women. And I think that's something really, I always, in my family, now that we're, among friends here, I always joke about us having to take care of them. I said, without us caretakers, how are you going to get to the future, right? So it's all our effort. Matthew's nodding.
Thank you. Thanks to Michelle, Haiyun, and Pat, and everyone works for Yuan She. This is a wonderful opportunity, and hopefully we perhaps can find another opportunity to collaborate.
Yeah, this
as a team to do something together.
Yeah,
yes.
I think this lovely, quote unquote, not lovely, this pandemic is also making these Zoom meetings a norm, which brings us all together. I was very reluctant in giving online lectures before, always want to see people person to person, but given the fact that we can't, this is better than nothing, at least. And I think that really brings a lot of people out of their, what do you call it? Geographical limitation. So that is really, I always say that UIUC, again, as a physicist, I know Bardeen and I know all his students are, my husband's bosses have never been not from UIUC. He can never escape UIUC because all
computer science?
No. Semiconductor.
Computer science?
Semiconductor. Bardeen, Shockley, and what's the other name? I mean, they are the inventor, right, of transistor. And the whole transistor's history of 60, 70 years is designing software and hardware so that in the pandemic, we can all keep our jobs. That we managed to have these. This is all thanks to Bardeen. So my husband can never escape UIUC. Yeah.
I began to love Zoom meetings now because, like today, I learned so much from our participants, the audience. Some of their questions, although we didn't have enough time to answer, but they're inspiring and thought-provoking. Very useful because usually when we scholars, professors, we go to an academic conference, we only talk to people like us, scholars and professors. But thanks to Yuan She, now we can hear different voices, and some of these questions really help me to rethink about knowledge making and distribution. Very, very good.
Yeah, thank you. See, now our lovely audience are still with us. So many people still
really?
here, 45.
We're not behind the curtain.
I was just gonna, we didn't have a chance to mention this. It didn't really fit in the discussion, but
Matthew, you can go ahead.
regarding UIUC and the huge, and long-standing Chinese relationship with UIUC. It's not just in the sciences. The two-time Academy Award-winning director, Ang Lee, is a UIUC graduate.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And, so he's,
I thought he was a chef in New York, cooking for his wife. That was it. Oh, he actually went to UIUC. Wonderful.
Yeah. I'm writing right now. I'm doing a project on the meteorologist and geologist Zhu Kezhen, who was sort of the father of meteorology in China. And he did his undergraduate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Oh, wow. And Hua Logan used to be our professor here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, my grandmother was very close to Hua Logan.
It's after the U.S. government returned part of the bauxite indemnity to China. We have a long history of accepting Chinese students here at UIUC. We have some nice transcripts of these students.
And if, the audience is there, and again, my great thanks to all of you, which I really appreciate is that each one of us, despite how small our effort is, actually makes a difference. Because I can see Hua Luogeng, Zhu Kezhen, how they went back and they were able to make a huge difference just by being that person and who they are and bringing back the knowledge. If you look at Japan in the 1800s, how they learned from the Dutch, 蓝学 in Japanese. So it's a wonderful optimism that I have a feeling where one of us, no matter how little effort we put in, that is a positive effort, then it will always breed some positive result out of it. So I really appreciate you guys being here.
And again, to the audience, if you have any ideas about how Chinese or Asian American communities can collaborate with boring scholars and help us to learn from you and help us to distribute our research or teaching materials to the broader community, not only Asian community, but also other ethnic racial communities, so we can understand each other better. Please don't hesitate to email me. And usually I reply within 24 hours, unless sometimes I spread myself too thin, but I definitely will.
I really want to connect you to our APALI program. What happens is for the APALI, the amazing thing is it's very activist driven. So most of my fellow students or my, people that I work with actually are in the civic, what do we call it? They are civil servants. They are the aide to the mayors. They are the young aspiring politicians. And many of them are Asian Americans. So it's really a pipeline for that kind of effort. And I see, I actually didn't have time to mention it because I wrote it down. In terms of from what we can do historical, from looking at history to predicting the future, that's the time axis. But in terms of the human axis, all the way from local grassroots, to high school, to elementary school, book reading club. So I go into the elementary school to read to my, kids' friends, all the way up to the politicians. We just have to keep on, pushing our agenda so that we can become the people at the table, not on the table, basically. So I think that pipeline is very important where we are. And you guys, I wonder if UIUC has a political science or that type of program, because political science is still more about research, right?
I'm so sorry to interject. I just want to say I've been kind of behind the scenes. I'm Pat, and I'm one of the sort of behind the scenes co-founders of Yuyansha and the Society of Heart's Delight. And I want to say, just express my sincere gratitude for all of you being here. And Haiyun, Dr. Zhang, you did a fantastic job. With so many panelists at the same time, it makes it more tricky. And I think Mark alluded to this, that we're old-time friends. We know each other back from China, and we have many beautiful memories of our life there in China together. And I just feel so touched and moved by all of you. And just the fact that we still have over 30 people just kind of like, hanging out, watching the conversation shows that there is a hunger for this connection. And so anyway, thank you so much. Do whatever you like to do. Michelle and I have guests coming to the property here, but we're just going to leave it running, and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, actually, I have a little announcement.
Okay.
I already invited some of our members to write us about their thoughts about our events. This conversation is too important. So we'll compile as an article. We'll publish and share with all of you.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to leave to prepare dinner for my children.
Okay.
Hi guys, it is lovely seeing all of you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michelle invited me to
Thank
her
you.
place. I need to check it to see my leg is up to it. I may just show up instead of on this side, on their side of the Zoom.
and also if there's other members of our community who are interested in certain topics, or they're interested in hosting and taking on that big job that Dr. Zhang took on.
Small job, nothing.
Please reach out to us. We're open, and this is really about community and everyone having a voice.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.